Now it's my pleasure to introduce your presenter today, Stephan Liozu. Stephan Liozu is Chief Value Officer of the Tallies Group and Chief Marketing Officer of Tallies Inc. in the USA. He is also an adjunct professor and research fellow at the Case Western Research University Weatherhead School of Management. Stephan holds a PhD in management from Case Western Reserve University, an MS in Innovation Management from Toulouse School of Management, and an MBA in marketing from Cleveland State University. He is a certified pricing professional and Process certified change manager and a strategizer business model innovation coach. Over the past few years, Stephan published many academic articles and authored 4 books. He also sits on the advisory board of LeveragePoint Innovations and the Professional Pricing Society. So with that, Stephan, welcome.
Thank you. Good morning, afternoon, and evening for all of you. Pleasure to be back here and sharing some of my knowledge and experience. And I must tell you that, for the past few years, as I have been working on value modeling and dollarization or differentiation, the topic of intangibles always comes on the table. And this is why LeveragePoint and I decided to tackle this topic and look at what exists out there and how do we, what are the best practices that some companies do use. And so it's the beginning of the thinking and the exploration. I think, but it's worth the time because, as you know, all of you, we are in an age of experience, and experience is intangible. It is a combination of tangible things that would lead to an intangible perception. But yet, you could have a tremendous amount of differentiation in intangibles, and the key is, how do you monetize that? How do you dollarize it? So that's a question I get over and over and over, and we decided to spend some time on it today. The first thing I'll tell you and remind all of you is that in the end, we're talking everything that we do in value modeling is about managing customer benefits and understanding what the benefits are. It could be revenue gains, they could be cost reduction or cost optimization for the customer. And then there is that big bucket of emotional contribution. And this is the value triad created by McDavid and Wilkinson's, 2 great experts in value management. But as you see more and more, even in B2B, we're getting into much more discussions around relationships, comfort, ease of use, friendliness, courtesy. And these could be making the difference, especially as manufacturers and product-centric companies are matching each other's performance levels. Sometimes the differentiation and the perceived benefits from customers are coming from this emotional contribution bucket. So which means when you look at the B2B, B2C, and B2B2C world, and then to a certain extent some B2G, I would say, but there is going to be a balance between the rational, the dollarized, the economical discussion, and also all these concepts of emotional, psychological, the relationship driven, dimension of exchange, which means that intangibles, for me, the way I see them, when you study you conduct your segmentation, customer segmentation at the very beginning of the value-based pricing process, you will also have to do your buying center, your analysis of the stakeholders in the customer location, and who does what and who's receptive to what. So in essence, procurement teams might be much more receptive to rational economical discussion, total cost of ownership, lifetime value of the opportunity, short-term discounts, you name it. But then when you go see a CFO or the finance team or the compliance team or the risk management team, you may have to use intangibles there to kind of hook them and get their attention, which means at some point you still would want to manage this communication of intangible and find a way to dollarize it. And we'll get into that in this presentation. How do you turn, the risk of failure into a number, right? And today we're in an age of breaches and cyber attacks and and all these IT risks, well, you could tell a CFO, or cyber-secured, or you could tell them, I can reduce your risk of being hacked by 50% or 95%, and for that, you're going to pay a premium. And that premium is worth the $1 million I'm going to save you. So if you look at for example, the Target, the cost of the breach that Target experienced a couple years ago, it's in the hundreds of millions of dollars. So this is where we want to get into these nuggets, these risk assessment that we're going to communicate to some of the agents in the stakeholder map or in the buying center on top of the rational stuff. So the most common intangible drivers that I've seen in many of my value modeling experience and workshops is, obviously there is a brand. Yes, the brand is an intangible, and the brand has a great value for lots of companies, whether they're in B2B or B2C, and even B2G, business to government. There could be more and more today the country of origin, made in Europe, made in France, made in the USA. There is going to be the value of sustainability, not only in the strategy, in the products, but then we're going to get much more into the risks, security, risk reduction or risk of failure, risk of interruption, risk of disruption in my process, risk of reject in my production process. So some of those are, I would say, less intangible, but they're still intangible, less intangible because you can still calculate it by doing, statistical analysis of your process, I would say. But those are the ones that I see most often, and there's probably more. But the first question is, that I have in mind is, when I look at this, is what does intangible mean? So I went in and found a definition. Obviously, it's unable to be touched or grasped and not having a physical presence. So you can touch it, right? It's abstract, like a relationship. It's abstract. You feel some kind of a emotional or psychological experience with with someone that you get along with in doing business. That's friendly, that gives you a response very quickly. So you might be able to, I would say, break down this one intangible drive into many things that person or that relationship means for me. Some of it might be more tangible, others may be just feelings or perceptions. But usually we run into this kind of intangible here, and the list is not exhaustive. There is brand perception, trustworthiness. Trust is coming a lot into, especially when you're doing mission critical products, where safety is an issue. I'm talking about avionics, transportation, pharmaceutical. You want to make sure that this is, there's no risk of failure here. Experience overall is not doing business with, relationship, reputation, and I'll let you. But a lot of time you get into the financial strength of my company could be the perceived differentiators from the customer, right? What does that mean? The stability of the business, the fact that we've been in business for 100 years. And often I'll tell you, and those are nice to have for customers, but sometimes they're very important. If you sell, for example, IT systems that are maybe more infrastructure driven and they're going to be lasting for 10 to 15 years, the fact that you've been in business for a long time and you're still here to be able to support them and upgrade them and staff them, it's a tremendous differentiator or customer needs, I would say. So you could think, okay, well, those are nice, but how do you measure them? And that's really the essence of what we're talking about today. And I can tell you, it's not easy. It's not easy, and you're going to have to sometimes use some of the off-the-shelf market research and maybe tools that are available. Sometimes you're going to have to create your own testing method and then go with it. As you know, if you've done value modeling before, a lot of what you do is, creating credible numbers, credible analysis for your customers that, because you put yourself in the shoes of your customers and you worry about their perceptions, then you go for validation. They validate for you that yes, the perception is, that I'm going to measure that perception this way. Some of them are easily measurable through, for example, you look at employee satisfaction, employee morale, and how the morale of the company can benefit the customers versus another company that they not have as much, of a great employee morale. This is a traditional engagement survey or employee satisfaction score. So I'm sure you think right now about a lot more of intangible you've run into, and please share them on the chat box if you want, and then we'll add them to the list before we send the PDF to the attendees. So one thing that I want you to consider is, and I run into this a lot, services are not intangibles. Yes, it may not be as palpable as tangible as products, but yeah, the manifestation of services, and that's what I've listed this below. You still can touch a service through a contract, an agreement, a statement of work, paperwork that comes to you, analysis and diagnosis, maybe a software you use. So they may be in between tangible and intangible, but at the end of the day, services today, the way they are crystallized in business, I would say are no longer fully an intangible. I would separate them into a different category. And you may disagree, and that's fine, because this is, for me, I would say there's probably a lot of school of thoughts in the topic. But because you could get all these things, you have service personnel, you have software for service, you have data related to service. All that thing is actually more tangible than we used to think. And we're in an era today of moving from product-centric business model to solution and service-centric. So we've come a long way in the last 10 years in lots of companies that have had to create tangible offering of their services. So just food for thought here. So how do you translate then your intangible benefits or drivers into something more tangible, more understandable, and something that's going to relate in terms of data for the customer? Well, I would say we're in an era of data and data analytics, and we have a lot of data flowing in our organizations, and sometimes I would recommend to some of my colleagues in Thales or outside of the company to really look at all the information flowing into the organization. If you have technical support teams, if you have field service teams, if you have marketing teams dedicated to brand and image and experience, you will hear about data. And that data is going to come in many points of entry in the organization. And the key is to gather all this data and to assemble it in a way that you can mine it. And you'll see that some of the techniques that we use to monetize or to dollarize the value of intangibles need data. Now you could go and acquire it. You could go and develop it yourself and start from scratch. But I can guarantee you, in your company, you already have a lot of data in your business. So that means you would, like any other data analytics process, create what they call a data lake and link all this data, whether it's satisfaction scores or survey results, transactional data, service field reports and data. You may have to do some context analysis of some of the field reports, but at the end of the day, it will require the same discipline that you would use for all the business intelligence processes you have in your company. And then you have to link it to the customer profits. You have to link it to the some industry outcome variable. And that's probably the most tricky component of the link there. So what am I talking about? So these are the most, I would say, commonly used benchmark tools and indices that I use to look at intangibles. So if you're talking about brand, then there are brand power scores that you can buy. You could put your company's name into a omnibus study, or some third-party research company is already doing a brand positioning research in an industry. Then it's a question of asking and buying your your score, I would say, through continuous and systematic research that will go out every month or quarterly basis. The same with reputation score. There is a reputation institute that can run market research for you and look at a reputation score you may have versus your competitors. So in essence, when the message would become, then we have a great reputation in our industry, in your value proposition. Two, our reputation score is 30% more than our nearest competitor. And maybe you stop at the 30%. Then you got to find a way to go from 30% to maybe the number, and that you would do through a conversion rate or through, some linking of the maybe market share or volume in the industry to so that's where I go back to data mining. You may have to acquire industry data, and you may link, a series of data sets to understand what is the impact of 2 or 5 points of increase of reputation on customer willingness to pay, customer intention of buying, et cetera, et cetera. So it works very well for distribution, for example. If you sell through distributors, then you would tell the distributors that your reputation score can actually increase their traffic in their stores or increase their customer intention to buy in the store. So you do have to make the links between the various components of the equation here. So there is brand endorsement scores. The most known is probably the Net Promoter Score. I'm sure some of you are using Net Promoter Score, NPS, linked to buying intention, likelihood to recommend, and likelihood to purchase. Net Loyalty Score. Then you have the Customer Satisfaction Score, pretty classic. If you do your barometer, you do your tracker of customer satisfaction, where you're going to track 20 to 25 attributes on a quarterly or semi-annual base. Then you're going to use that data to derive the impact, or at least a number. Because what you're trying to do, remember, is move away from just a statement of saying we have great satisfaction with our customer, but move to the second step, which is 95% of our customers give us a rating of 8 or above. And then we're moving from just a plain statement to a factual statement with some kind of number. And then from there, we have to find a way to go to the impact of satisfaction on the customer business, or the sales, their sales, or the intention to buy, etc. The customer effort score and repeat rates are more about experience, and I found those by searching the KPIs that the consultants and companies use to track experience, and those are the two that. So there is a way, and there is a way to track all these aspects of loyalty, reputation, endorsement, brand power, so that you could use that into your value proposition, and moving from just a statement to a first level of quantification. The second summary of what you could use is the market research tools that you probably use in your company. So you will do your own surveys, you will do your own customer satisfaction surveys, positioning surveys, and you could do some willingness to pay research. And remember that you will have to do that with your direct customers, but also with your customer's customer, because at the end we're talking about our customer's benefit, and we may have to go study the customer's customer. So to calculate the impact and see potentially because we have a great position and reputation, or our customers are very satisfied, then the impact to you is X with your customers. All the traditional techniques that is conjoint analysis and other choice-based models, and Kano and concept testing if you don't have a large population. Those will be able to tell you the value of an intangible attribute, and you would have to crystallize different levels of the attributes. So a reputation score at 90%, a reputation score at 95%, for example, or 79% ease of use. So we got to find different levels that we put in the model, and we test them with the customers, and it will give you some element of how much is it worth in the mind of the customer base. Also for you, looking at if you do your next, and that's something that I always recommend to anyone doing customer satisfaction surveys, is to include a few more outcome variables, so that you usually will have total satisfaction, overall value for money, likelihood to purchase, likelihood to recommend. But then you would run multiple regression analysis on your scores, and you would extract in there the drivers that would explain the customer's outcome variable, and you could try to use them to come up with some quantified numbers. And obviously you would have to compare you versus competition. So now to go back to the credibility issue, if you show your own customer satisfaction surveys and your own scores, you may run into some objections from the customers that it's not independent. So then you may join other industry satisfaction surveys like NPS or what we talked about before. But for your own analysis, it's important to have it. The R-squared decomposition technique is looking at, if you have a model that explains 50% of the variance, and you have 5 or 6 variables that are significant, then each variable will have a weight in explaining the model, and you could translate that into some kind of a weight. That's what we're looking for. So if satisfaction is driven by ease of use, then and it explains 80% of the variance, then you would use these numbers because at the end of the day, we're trying to find facts and numbers and ratios to speak to our customers and their different actors. A/B testing and pricing research and other things that you can run. So if you look at this slide and that slide, obviously you need some resources, you need some budgets, and you need to have some people who understand data and are able to triangulate all these numbers coming in. And you have to obviously be careful how you make the causal effect relationships or the correlation between all these techniques and the customer benefit. So, it requires experience, and there's consulting companies and research companies that can do that for you. But if you do it on your own, then you have to be understanding that if you're serious about monetizing or dollarizing the value of your intangibles, you're going to have to get data somehow. It's not going to come out of thin air. And I can also guarantee you that some of these research tools and here benchmark indices, you may have them already in your company. It's a matter of collecting them, assembling them, and creating a data environment that allows you to test and experiment. So some examples of intangibles, that generate revenue. So for example, speed of innovation, and if you crystallize in your value proposition the fact that you're faster than your competition in bringing product and solution to market, and you would look at your time to market versus competitors' time to market. And what does that mean for the customer? Then it's reduce their time to market, which means you can accelerate the invoicing of the customer, because, for example, if you build a hotel, you go faster than the competitors to build the hotel and to put it in operations. Then they could start invoicing earlier than if they went to another general contractor or another building company. So it increases the lifetime value of the product, and that you can dollarize. So something else, for example, in turn, diversify and sell more. Relationship. So one of the aspects that often come in the relationship is when you're a supplier and you have great access to the ecosystem, and you could help your customers make connections in the ecosystem that will allow them to do better business development or joint ventures. So you become a gatekeeper, and so what is the likelihood of that working and the customer developing a joint venture or generating revenue? then you're going to have to look at, for you, your experience and all the times that this happened. And you could say, and we're looking for success stories there. Over the last 5 years, we made 20 such connections, and on average, each connection generated $1 or $2 million through joint ventures. And you could create a couple case studies to show the value of the unique value of your access in the ecosystem. So, but you have to be careful how you go from A to B to C, and you got to make sure it's validated, and you got to make sure it's credible. You're not going to say access to a partner in the ecosystem is going to generate $2 billion of value. 2 billion is a bit extreme. But, for example, I worked for a company in the past in the pharma industry where the CEO had the greatest reputation in the industry, and they would, quote unquote, allow the CEO, package the CEO time in chunks of 2 hours, half a day, and that CEO would go to customers and make keynote speeches and make roundtables and spend time with a bunch of professionals. And we dollarize that. What is the value of being a high-powered CEO come to your organization, although it's a supplier going to a customer, and stimulating ideas and stimulating working environments and increasing employee morale at the customer location versus a competitor CEO who may not be as good or maybe as charismatic as a table, for example. So these are examples of how that would create excitement and additional outcome, I would say benefits for the customer. On the other side of the equation, you have more the risk, and risk is big in the evaluation of intangibles. So I usually go through this process, when we talk about risk calculations, I would say. You got to calculate the impact of an event or a failure to a customer. So what is the risk? What is the impact of a breakdown, of a hacking, of a failure, of a recall, of someone dying, of an accident? That's some of them are published. You have accident rates, you have failure rates. So we have to find a way to capture this number. So right now, if you look at the average cost of a hacking, it's in the $1 million. And there are independent sources that will tell you usually a cyber secure breach is going to be costing on average companies $2 million. So that's what we're looking at. Then you have to look at the occurrence of such event, right? So there's, and right now there's a lot of publications on that. The risk of being hacked today is 75% or 80% or 50%. So we got to find these industry statistics, consultant studies or public reports that show the risk of having that failure, right? And sometimes you may have to go to your industry association and say, hey, what is the risk? What is the average, the average rate of breakdowns for, X type of machines? And they may have it. They may have an expert. The key is to document the source, and the source is a credible source, industry association. Talk to the VP of technical, development, blah blah blah, and the date. So then you look at this, you have the impact, you have the probability of occurrence. Then you have to look at, what's your improvement that you're proposing with your solution versus the general reporting industry statistics or versus a competitor if they publish such a risk. And this is the base for your formula. You know the impact, you know the probability, and you know your improvement or risk mitigation or, the protection. You calculate the impact of your improvement. So 10 points of reduction of risk is equal to X. And then it becomes a probabilistic formula. So, this is done. This is not easy to do. It takes a different gymnastics, but insurance companies do it. Actuators do it, and risk is, if you go into your risk management team or your compliance team, they're used to doing this, and they can help you actually create the logic for your formula. So in essence, you have different types of risks. You have business risk, catastrophic risk, operational risk, development risk, risk of failures, you name it, all kinds of different risks. And it's all about the probability of reducing or increasing something. So compliance, for example, we can help you be compliant, right? Because we have the teams, we have the process, a bit more tangible than, the regular intangible, but, and the risk is reduction of penalties. You want to be compliant. Otherwise, you're going to pay X, and that happens a lot. every year 20% of companies in the industry are non-compliant. You don't want to be one of them, because on top of that, there is a risk of, damage of your reputation, your image. So I can't go through all of them, but the risk of failure is big. Cost of return, cost of production interruption, downtime, tight supply chain, disruption of the supply chain, and sometimes you have penalties in your contract. So, and the cost to serve the customer complaint and to serve the warranty. So, in essence, risk is, it goes back to what I was saying in the in the introduction of the presentation, is a buyer may tell you, well, we have no risk, everything is under control. I don't want to hear about your risk mitigation or your probability or good. But then you will have to go to to the CFO. You will have to go to the compliance office if it's a big company. Talk to the CEO if it's a mid-sized company, and tell them there's a lot of risk. No one is risk-proof. And you know what? Last time one of your peers got hacked, it cost them $2 million because it's published. The average hack is X, the average risk of failure, and it happens. Machinery breakdown. So by buying our software, buying our solution, we can reduce that risk. And right now, if you look at predictive maintenance, that's what we're doing in predictive maintenance. Is predicting risk so that we can kind of ease in the eventually the risk zone and prevent it. So an example then of a value proposition that you would use in the LeveragePoint software is, is really about what I just mentioned. This is the safety, the risk of safety breakdowns or issues, accidents, and you would look at your risk reduction here. You would have, okay, minor accident every year or two, cost of a minor accident, 23 million, serious accident, 10. So you go through the occurrence and the cost, and then you look at, okay, my risk reduction is 75% versus, where you are currently, and it's a big chunk of savings, right? And anybody who is doing or running a business today in top management probably is doing a risk report. If you get audited every year by the Deloitte, the Pricewaterhouse, you will have to do a risk analysis for your business, which means this is done already, right? Risk of non-compliance, risk of environmental issue, risk of catastrophic breakdown, hurricanes, you name it. So work with them and use these numbers, and you could see the annual savings based on the occurrence and the cost is humongous. Now, the buyers will tell you that's bullshit. It never happened to us. But you know what? It never happens until it happens, right? Equifax didn't think they would have that 140 billion, people data stolen or hacked. So then, it's up to us to remind to the stakeholders that the intangibles, the reputation, the risk is everywhere, because business is risky in general. We can't be complacent. Now, you don't want to, focus too much on putting the fear into them, but you really have to show them dramatic case studies of risk. This is what happened with Target. This is what happened when a floor cracked. This is what happened when the car, remember when GM had a recall for a 75-cent piece in the engine or in the ignition, that they went cheap on the process and they changed the part to save a little money. And, it cost them millions and millions and hundreds of millions in litigation and image. And some people died. And so, yes, it's okay. Now, you don't want to, put the guilt and and into the customer, but you want to use these dramatic case studies to show them the risk is everywhere. So, in essence, you have to make risk a reality. And you have to find publications, and nuggets, that's what I call the value nuggets, related to all these, accidents, his occurrence, the value of reputation, because it's a lot of companies publishing on that. And usually I go on Twitter to do this, and I'll follow Pricewaterhouse, McKinsey, BCG, and you name it, all these companies, IDC, and they'll publish a lot of independent reports that they'll put out there in the public space. And those are credible sources that you can then use in your value bottle, the way you see it on the screen, right? And you publish your sources, and you say, well, it's not me saying it, it's, Forrester, and it's going to be IBM Research, it's going to be, and obviously you want to stay away from non-credible sources, so you have to be very smart in how you use it. So the value nuggets, then I collect them personally now in Thales. There's an amazing amount of things that are published that we maybe not paying attention to, but those will help you in dollarizing your intangibles. So studies that are published, and for example, joint study by McKinsey found a large software project on average run 66% over budget. So if you're good at program management and you guarantee to be on time, then if you don't have the number of the competition, then you will use the average industry scores to tell them, we're at 0% on average of 66%, so we're going to reduce that with you, and it's going to be a lot of time and effort and administrative expenses that we're going to save you. Now, if you look at Kaspersky Lab, the third one on the list, this is the average, the average cost of a security break for mid-sized companies, $649,000 when it's all said and done. So then you would say to the buyer, when the buyer tells you, well, I don't need your software because we're secured and never happened to us. Well, you may want to tell them, well, you know what? Lots of companies are getting hacked and it's costing them an average of $649 or $1 million or whatever it is. And can you take the chance of not buying a more secure software because, you've never been hacked? I don't think today it will be acceptable by the CFO, for example. And then you have a recall, the cost of a recall for Toyota, the famous recall that was $1.2 billion. So those are extreme cases, you may say. But remember, we're talking about intangibles. And we got to find a way to connect all these intangibles, whether it's risk, reputation, brand power, ease of use, all the things we talked about, to a number, right? And if you look at right now what's published on experience, there's a lot of publication nuggets that will give you the value of experience for customers and what does it mean in the customer daily life. And we got to use these nuggets, especially coming from credible sources. So one of the key questions you have is, for intangibles, do you show the numbers or do you not? And sometimes is it not better to stop at the what I call the step 3 of that sequence here? The sequence is the value modeling sequence that I've shown you before in other webinars, translating differentiators to customer benefits, then prioritizing them. Then the first step of quantification is turning these benefits into compelling facts and ratio. And then the second step of quantification is to actually putting a dollar number on it. Sometimes it's better to tell you that 97% of the customers in our industry are endorsing our brand, and competition is at 79. Sometimes that dramatic effect in the ratio is enough to hook the customers. So you stop at the first level of quantification. Sometimes you will go and dollarize it, not all the time. And there's a lot of discussion in the pharma industry or in the avionics industry or in the military sector. What is the value of a life, right? When you do, the reduction of friendly fire casualties, the reduction in accident in planes or cars. What is the value of 10 years of additional life because of drugs, efficiency? So value of a life and all these very sensitive, items, you may not want to put them in the value prop, in the value model, but for you, you need to know it. But to the customer in a value proposition, you might stop at the facts and ratio. And that is going to be depending on the sensitivity of your industry, the maturity of your industry, and what customers are used to listen to. So, and I always recommend to companies to ease in the dollarization, and the value messaging. Don't go from one day to the other, not dollarizing, and the next day you're fully dollarizing and projecting hundreds of numbers because the customers are going to be a bit surprised and shocked. So you ease in the value messaging using numbers. So sometimes, ratios are better. So some wrap-up discussions here. So for some customers, intangible benefits are more relevant than tangible ones. And that's key, especially in B2C. The value of the brand, it's tremendous. And sometimes you buy things, you don't pay attention to price, you just want the brand. And the $2 difference doesn't make a difference because the power of the brand is so big. So there are techniques and methods to quantify the value of intangible benefits. So the techniques are traditional techniques, but then you're going to have to, find a way to connect the data and make these causal or correlation, statements, I would say, and do it with care, because at the end of the day, we're looking at credible analysis, not perfect analysis. So, in Intangible, nothing is going to be perfect. You're going to make some assumptions, and you're going to test them with the customers, and you're going to validate it through your interaction and your value conversation. So you don't seek perfection, you seek credibility and the causality that makes sense, if you can use causality. So we have to be careful with this, because sometimes you're facing very credible customers, and they're going to challenge you on your correlation, your causality, and and you may have an egg on your face because they do their own analysis maybe, or they know better than you do. So for example, if you sell to a very sophisticated company like Procter & Gamble, and they've been around the block a few times, and you can BS them on the value of your intangible. So you really have to be careful and test the water and test your value proposition, which, by the way, you would do anyway, whether it's tangible and intangible. And then rely on your boundary spanners to collect your value nuggets. So there's people out there that like to read a lot, and they like to go outside of their sphere, that zone of comfort, and they go find all kinds of different reports, and you'll be surprised what's published out there. I consider myself a boundary spanner for Thales, where I go and find all kinds of different sources of data, information, collect them, and then circulate them to the marketing teams that I know, across the divisions, because, not everybody has the time to spend the time on Twitter and to spend the time reading on websites and to do searches, literature searches. And so your business intelligence people could do it, your market intelligence people could do it, your marketers, analysts could do it. But at the end, you will find that, it's also a question of circulating the data. And there's, it's amazing, what you could find out there as far as help with someone that did an analysis of the impact of experience on the customer business. Then you use that to reference it. And then if the customer say, well, where do you get that number from? Share the report to them. That's why you have to be intelligent in how you make you transfer the data into your own analysis. So those are, kind of a summary discussion. Now, I will tell you the management of intangible is not easy. And we typically would start with the tangibles and go into product performance, service performance, and software performance, and look at how we're better than competitors. And then we'll recommend, well, you start with the big one, and show the savings of the tangible, and maybe your differentiator number 2 or 3 would be intangible. Well, it works, but sometimes, a CFO or a risk manager will want to see your risk analysis, and you're going to have to look at more intangible things. For example, what is the cost of an impact on reputation? If you do have your name, out there for some kind of failure, so you may have to calculate that for them and tell them it's serious. And chances are they've done that before. They would have done. So obviously it's only 45 minutes. I can't go in detail, but I hope I stimulated your thinking and provided you some of the tools, and go out there and look at what's in your company that you can use and start the process. It will take some budget and resources and some collective intelligence, but it's worth it, because a lot of our differentiation today is intangible, and it is great time to start thinking about it and to start dollarizing it with intention. So I wish you the very best with this, and I'm done with that presentation today. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Stephan. And we've had a few questions come in during the webinar so far, but there's still time to enter your question into the panel on your screen. While you're entering, a reminder to complete that 10-second survey while exiting today's webinar to receive a copy of how to put a value tag on your product and be entered into a raffle giving away 5 free copies of Dollarizing Differentiation Value. And now to give you a couple more minutes to enter your questions, here's a few words on LeveragePoint. A great value proposition has the flexibility to transition gradually and continuously through the sales cycle. Starting as a flexible case study, a value proposition is a tool that can be used with typical customer data in early sales conversations. Gradually, customer specifics are revealed and unfold through customer interaction and become embedded in the value proposition, as it provides a basis for customer value analysis and pre-sales customization as customers evaluate your solution. As customers decide to purchase, the value proposition becomes a shared business case, collaboratively agreed between sales executives and customer sponsors that can be used by buyers as their own internal financial justification to purchase. Sales uses the flexible case study to connect, qualify, and differentiate in the first stage of the buying process. Sales and pre-sales credentializes, engages, and customizes with customer value analysis in the evaluation phase. Finally, sales uses the shared business case to sponsor buy-in and speed up procurement, negotiation, and closing. Sales reps now have a cloud-based tool that easily communicates the ROI and value your solution provides similar customers in their industry. It clearly shows this in graphical and summary form. Located beneath the graphs and summary, there are assumptions that can be quickly modified in a meeting to align with the buyer's data. Beneath the assumptions, the overall value being delivered is broken down into specific value drivers that can be drilled down to further for those buyers that are interested. Marketing collateral is provided in the tabs at the bottom, including industry case studies, videos, and white papers. LeveragePoint sales users are saying that by presenting this value to the customer early, they are wasting less time with unqualified prospects, allowing their pre-sales resources to spend more time working on winning qualified opportunities. If you're interested in learning more about LeveragePoint, please click the appropriate boxes in the exit survey, and we'll be happy to set up a time to see if the tool is right for you. And we are also doing a case study giveaway. So if you would like to send us one of your case studies, we will be happy to make a free value proposition based off of that. So to move to Q&A with Stephan, we've had a few come in. To answer the most popular one myself, yes, this webinar is recorded, and the slides and recording will be emailed to you within 2 business days. All right, Stephan, here's your first question. Could you talk a little bit more about conjoint analysis? How many intangibles could you use in conjoint? How much is the average cost? Just a little bit more detail there.
Yeah, so, conjoint is just a technique that it's a very powerful technique. I've seen a maximum of 4 or 5 attributes in a conjoint because remember you duplicated the choices and what the customer has to respond. And usually 1 or 2 intangible and 1 or 2 tangible driver or attribute with different. The key is to find the different levels of performance for an intangible attribute. So, and that may be a little tricky. That's why you may start with a Kano analysis before more of a qualitative analysis. Conjoint is a powerful technique, but what is important is what you do before and what you do after, which is before what you put in it, and after how do you interpret the data. And how do you put that in really in essence in your marketing mix? I've seen conjoint, I've seen companies do them themselves with, there's a software available online that you could use if you have the sophistication and the maturity to do it. And I've seen other companies do that with partners and consultants, and the cost could be anywhere between $75,000 to $200,000 depending on the population you have to survey and the complexity of your offer and the methods you're going to use to set that up. Very powerful, though. I tell you, to more of the classical intangible like brand and experience. I think you could definitely use conjoint, but it's not for all opportunity and it's not for all intangible. So and it requires budget. So you have to have common sense on how you use it.
Great, thanks. And next question, can you provide more guidance for researching nuggets within our target industries? Yeah,
so what personally I do is these value nuggets, I do Google alerts. So I have a couple keywords here and there that if there is something that I really want to find, I'll do a Google alert, and you get every day an email with what's published. Now you have to be able to manage and quickly look at it. I also, and I know it's a bit strange, or unusual, but I use Twitter a lot, and I use Twitter to find, by following the right industry sources in your ecosystem. It is amazing what these companies publish. Amazing. And then, I usually browse through I search these specific companies like Forrester and IBM and et cetera, in specific subjects. And then when I see a tweet that I like, I'll email it to me to my computer and then download the report and file it. And then I'll circulate it to my, the appropriate marketing team. Hey, here is a published report that you may want to pay attention to. And by the way, look at the way they dollarize or they quantify X. Because in Thales we're doing a lot more dollarization now and using value model and including LeveragePoint. And then we are, we need to find these nuggets to help us.
Absolutely. Next question here. Some of the intangibles might be a bit sensitive. How do you prevent the upsetting of customers?
Yeah, that's key. And that's what I mentioned that in the end. At the end of the day, there's what you do inside and how you analyze it and use it. And there is what you project outside. And it's, you have to be careful. But in some sectors it's okay, in others it's not okay, and it's taboo, So value of a life in pharma is definitely discussed, and actually you have commercials about, right now there's a cancer drug, that talks about extending your life by 10 years, and now they don't say that it's worth X, but they focus on the extension of your life, and I can guarantee you that this is in the price of the drugs somehow. So, and in other sectors, you don't talk about it. For example, in the military world, maybe you don't, you're not going to throw out, these numbers of the value of a soldier is X, Y, Z. It's not appropriate. So you really have to be sensitive to this, and then have discussions internally on what we use and say and what we don't.
Great. And next question, is it okay to use public research data, or do you always need to do your own primary research?
The key is credibility. So sometimes there is only primary research that you can do on your own to find it. And then and sometimes, third-party research is much more appropriate because that there is a certain amount of skepticism in the customer in receiving this type of information. So you may have to use an independent source. But it's also a question of budget, and can you find the information? But typically you would go to your industry associations or your whatever association is relevant to your business and look at what they publish and look at what they do. Do we do omnibus study? Do we do, you don't have to spend millions and millions. I mean, you could ask 2 or 3 questions to be put on the next study wave, and so you have to be smart with your funds. But so it's a question of, again, a balance. But the number one thing for me is credibility. When you support your value proposition, you face objections, you have to, have credible assumptions, credible sources, and credible data.
Absolutely. And kind of as a follow-up to that credibility, we have a question here. Causality is always a problem with sophisticated readers. For those of us who aren't professional researchers, how do we evaluate the validity of the nugget report?
Yeah, and that's key. So, so you have to do your homework, obviously, but you would assume that when McKinsey and BCG and IBM publish report, you would assume that it's been validated. Now, it's their own research, but it's been validated somehow, and they have a robust, rigorous method behind it. So that's an assumption that you can make if you don't, if you don't have I would go and look at their method section myself and look at how they did it. If they did survey one by phone, if they did survey by mail. So, and you have to, if you've done a little bit of research, you could do your own judgment. If you don't know anything about research and you find a source, you have to look at where this is coming from, because it could be heavily biased, and then you lose, if you use that, then you could really have egg on your face when the customer tells you, well, this is totally biased. So you would, go inside your company and find, if it's more quantitative stuff, find someone who's got a PhD or someone who's got a data analytics background and ask them, hey, what do you think is behind it? And if it's more qualitative, then you have to have discussions and circulate and say, what do you think? But the causality is difficult. I would tell you, be careful with causality, and especially if you you get into some of the sectors like chemical industry or others where the buyers are actually PhD in material science, and they'll, take you down in a second when you're going to start using causality. So be careful. know your target before you use this data.
Yeah, absolutely. And it looks like we've got time for one more question. We've only got one more question, so perfect. So last question for you, Stephan. In a pre-launch phase for a value model, what kind of survey is most useful?
Willingness to pay, I would say, if it's, so if you did a willingness to pay research and some of the pricing research in general, you might have to, test some of your hypotheses, and you can add in there the intangibles. So for example, it would be a different type of customer satisfaction. It would be, and I've done that before, where you've tested some concept, or you want to, early on the stage gate, you want to test the desirability of your offer, and but then you would add in there, in a list of attributes to be tested, some of the intangibles, and then you would run regression on likelihood to purchase and willingness to pay, and see what influences willingness to pay, and see if the intangibles are in there. So this is something that I highly recommend, but usually we don't have time to do it. It's a shame, but and some companies don't have the customer base to do it. If you have 5 customers, you can't do quantitative research, so you're going to have to do more qualitative conversation. But the more testing you can do through Kano, or through expert interview, focus group, or quantitative research, the better it is. And the key is, don't forget to include intangibles, because the natural thing to do is to put the tangible stuff, the service attributes, the product attributes, and the configurations, but include 1 or 2 intangibles, and start with this.
Great, thank you. And that looks like it's it for us for today. And if you have any follow-up questions for Stephan, please feel free to reach out directly or add those comments into the comment section on the survey that will pop up when you exit today's webinar. But that is it for us. So thank you all for taking the time to join us, and a special thank you for Stephan for your insights. And from all of us here at LeveragePoint, we hope you have a wonderful rest of your week. Take care.